this is really doing.
What's the thing about the Western blot is like me checking you for chickenpox.
Mm-hmm.
If I do a Western blot on you for chickenpox, there's a chance that it's going to come back positive. That doesn't mean you have the chickenpox, even though it never leaves our body. But what you have to understand is we have a test called a dot urine test. A dot urine test is that test you were talking about earlier, the PCR test. It actually looks for the germ or parts of the germ coming out in your urine after an antibiotic challenge. Now, if I find the germ in your urine, guess what? It's still in your blood. All right, and you still have the disease. So that's where the PCR test, which is not accepted by the American Medical Association or the infectious disease or the, the insurance companies as being an accurate test for Lyme, and they're just relying on a Western blot test. Okay, what we do a screening test is called a CD57. Have you heard of the CD57? And there's a big hospital here in town called Spectrum. And Spectrum, when you get a CD57 test done there, if you score low on it, they actually send you a paper by a Dr. Stricker saying that your chances of Lyme are very, very high. But since it's not 100%, insurance companies don't accept that. But that's how I measure your improvement. Because if I'm making you better, then your immune system's getting stronger. Okay? So the two ways you tell if a person's all better is your immune system becomes strong and stays strong for 3 months, or their symptoms are gone for 3 months.
That Spectrum's who Dr. Roth sends all of her labs to.
Okay.
She has a doctor in Traverse City, Dr. Catherine Roth, and she's I don't know how much she knows about the Lyme aspect, but she's definitely on top of the nutrition aspect. And
Where is she?
Traverse City, Catherine Roth.
Oh, okay.
I just know that Spectrum is the labs that she uses to send everything to. And she's a very friendly lady, helped us get these labs done for Lori. And our problem now is just there's no one in our area, and since she's bedridden, we can't move her, we can't take her anywhere. We're trying so hard to get things done, but the medical community is like, well, who's this doctor? They don't live in Traverse, who is this person and why do they want this done?
It was
Especially when the
Kung
doctors
Fu stance last night.
Right, especially when the doctors there truly believe she has ALS, even though everything points away
What
from
is ALS?
Right. That's what,
Polio.
That's my whole
we're like,
point.
well, can you treat it? Well, no, it's fatal. Okay, well then can we try something different? I mean,
Well, the thing I said to them last night before I showed them that she could move her arm was, you have just as much evidence to state that it's ALS that we have to state that it's Lyme.
Right.
We even actually have more. Okay, explain white blood cells in her spinal fluid. Explain moving, explain feeling in her feet that have not moved in 8 months. She can feel hot and cold. She can feel it. I'll go up and tickle her foot when she's sitting there and be like, hey. She's like, knock it off.
Yeah.
You don't do that with ALS. So okay. If it is that you say it is, if it's ALS, prove it. Prove it to me, and I'll leave you alone.
What you say? Prove what though? Because there's no such thing as ALS. It's just like it's a diagnosis that we have for insurance companies. Okay, so
That was the soundbite.
I asked all these. I belong to this neurological society, and I asked these neurologists when they're talking about MS one day, and they had the MS people, I think, from Harvard and San Francisco that run the MS clinics, and I said, maybe MS is Lyme disease, just throwing it out there. And has anybody just ever bothered to give those darn MS patients antibiotics? And they said, funny you should mention that. Some Canadians once did a study where they gave MS patients doxycycline, the #1 killer of spirochetes. And I said, what happened? He said, well, a lot of the people got better, but we think it was an anti-inflammatory effect. And it was like, who cares what effect it was? The people were getting better. So
The moon was in the 7th house.
Yeah, so anyway. Yeah.
But then you threaten their infrastructure. I mean, if all of those different specialties finally came together and said, you know, it's curable and this is how we do it, you don't have those people with it for, you know, 10, 15, 20 years who are getting treated for it. And
Well, if you go on the internet and you look under MRIs, you go to the MRI of an MS patient versus a Lyme patient, they're identical. And I have MRIs from a patient in Chicago, and I have neurologists in Chicago who have sent me patients that they can't figure out why. They said, well, we think he has MS, but we don't think he has MS. And they test positive with the Western blot, and we treat him with IV Rocephin, and the next thing you know, the patient's better, and the MRI clears up. You know, now it's like, well, what happened here? And so then the neurologist would send the guy back to the infectious disease guy that the poor kid saw earlier, and he said, well, yeah, maybe he does have Lyme disease. But that's good. So we are opening up people's minds, but, you know, it's sort of sad, it's slow, it's one at a time or two, you know, one here and one there, but the person has to be willing to look and be open-minded to start with, and we're so brainwashed that you know, that people have a drug deficiency, and that's what we need to give them, another drug. So, can I take a 5-minute break?
yes.
Why don't you introduce Stacy over here? Okay. The history of Lyme disease.
Wait a second, he's not ready yet.
A brief history.
A brief history.
A brief history of Lyme.
Hang on,
You know what? I need new tape.
Good.
You cut out the bad shots, right? The guys with camouflage straight out of the woods to catch their airline are snuggling up to her at the bar. She's cute banker, and telling hunting stories, and she's trying to get her stuff away from them, but there's no place to go in airports.
Right.
And she gets to a hotel room that night, wherever she is, and she wakes up with like a tick bite on her the next morning. And she's the only woman ever know to get a tick bite in an airport. So those hunters had, you know, they had ticks all over their clothes,
yeah.
and they got on her. She said her fur coat or whatever had leaned up against their clothes or something like that. Anyway, okay, back to you, Tim. That's what. Keep the patients rolling.
That's, I don't know, that's,
No, we were talking to, we had an interview with the bug man, and his name's Duke Elsner. He works for MSU Extension up in Traverse City, and we were asking about ticks, and he said, you know what, ticks can survive in cold weather, they can survive in hot weather. When it, you know, hot weather they do worse with, but they're so efficient, you know, as a creature.
Well, where was tick warfare first done? It was done with, I believe, the Germans and the Asians, and they would take balloons or airplanes and fly over the herds of cattle and drop some flea-infected rats onto the cattle herds, and then the fleas would infect the herds, and whether it was typhus or whatever, now all your cattle are wiped out. What are you going to eat? What are you going to drink? So the question is, where did Lyme disease come from? And there's a thought about this agricultural department on Plum Island, off Long Island by New York City, and they do all sorts of research there on bugs, and maybe some spirochete escaped and somehow ended up over by Lyme, Connecticut, which is not very far away. But what's more plausible is a book called the SS Elba, ELBA, I believe, where some female PhD goes out and notices that Lyme disease was first found in all the ports of the United States. And this happened around the time after World War II, and there was a plan called the Marshall Plan. And in the Marshall Plan, the Americans, in their generosity, in the days of Stalin, gave boats that were converted over to freighters to poor countries in the war to help them get going, and we were kind enough to lend the Soviet Union freighters, and they were kind enough to infect furs, when everybody loves their mink coats, and this is in the days mink was popular, with fleas and ticks, and sell them at a very low cost throughout the world, throughout the United States. And so the theory is that these infected furs arrived at low prices, and men bought them for their women at low prices, and that's how the disease got a foothold in the United States. And then it just spreads outward from there. And that is the most plausible theory I've ever seen on what better than to make a society sick and weak, and then they can't be your enemy. So once again, it's biological warfare by the Russians during the Cold War.
The theory that I'm familiar with is similar to that, but it has its origins here and not there. And the reason being is if you weaken an ill person is more valuable to an invading army than a dead person, because a dead person gets put off to the side.
Right.
An ill person needs 1, 2, maybe 3 people that could be fighting a resistance. They don't go to work. They don't contribute to society at 100%. They're taking care of somebody else. They are taken out of the infrastructure. The infrastructure starts failing. You know, the fields don't get tended, the banks don't get run, manufacturing doesn't happen, and it takes it down percentage by percentage by percentage. There were studies done on the amount of calories it takes over a certain amount of time to starve a human being.
Right.
And this was part of that. I mean, these studies that were conducted here. Knowing what you know about Lyme disease and the different types of disease mimics, do you think that it would be possible or even plausible for it to have been a hybrid, for something like this to be farmed or manufactured?
Well, that would be a Plum Island type thing that they manufactured this disease.
Well, they were working with strains and
Right, different spirochetes.
cooking salads and yes.
Anything's possible. Is it probable? Is it probable maybe the Russians or the Germans came up with that technology and just got in the wrong hands? But biological warfare, just like one little dose of anthrax is the perfect way to annihilate a city. But I'm not into biological warfare, I'm into making people better, so you're asking the wrong person.
All right.
We're glad you're into making people better.
Yeah, I was gonna ask some cool questions. Yeah. That thing. Talk about
Starts
that.
with a O.
The Ondimed. The Ondimed is a pulse-electronic magnetic frequency device, which has been used in medicine since probably the 1960s. When a bone wouldn't heal with a cast in 6 weeks, they would run electrical current through the bone in a hospital, and the electrical current, I believe through what's called Faraday's law, creates a magnetic field, and the magnetic field causes the bone cells to wake up and heal. And then they invented a device you wear on your knee called Bionicare, which will grow cartilage in your knee. That's Medicare approved. And you keep taking this. We use a different frequency to start your heart when it stops. So there's different electrical frequencies for different parts of the body. And that's how an MRI works. It measures the electrical frequency of your liver and compares it to different parts of your liver, to your colon, to your spleen, etc. So we use electricity to measure things, but the original medicine in the world was based on electricity. It was called acupuncture 3,000 years ago. And acupuncture was designed to balance electricity. Well, this on-demand computer that we've had for the past 5 years, what it does is it will find a damaged energy field of your body, and it will put in the correct energy for those cells so they can wake up and heal just like the bone would heal in the hospital. And the thing is about the on-demand is it can pretty much heal any part of the human body, whereas the hospital devices can just help your knee and your broken bone. And it's German technology that's been out there a decade, and there's a lot of research behind it. And the newest research is showing that it increases the ATP, the energy molecules of the cells, that it causes electron transfer, that it increases the pH of cells, because if cells are acidic, A, cancer can live there, and B, spirochetes and other germs can live there. So you want to have a pH of your body that's more neutral, like your swimming pool or your hot tub, so the chemicals work. And the same thing's true of the body, and the on-demand balances the pH of the body. So it does a lot of wonderful things, and it's catching on throughout the world. What more do you want to know? Well, we're part of an FDA research group to help anybody with chronic pain with the on-demand. You interviewed Susan Sellers a little while ago, who had been to Germany for a heat treatment. Her husband, who has a very rare disease, also had sciatica, pinched nerve in the back that caused leg pain. And this gentleman is so sick, and has been on immunosuppressive drugs and steroids, that he really didn't want to do any more drugs. And we gave him 5 or 10 on-demand treatments for 30 to 40 minutes each, and his pain is gone to this day. So it is a wonderful healing device without having to swallow a drug or a supplement or even changing your diet.
Very cool.
Would you be able to put in your 2 cents a little bit on Michigan and why it has such a problem with Lyme literate doctors? And why it seems like they're taking all our doctors away from us?
I have, I don't know if there's an underground movement, but I was just like all the other doctors out there saying, oh, there's no Lyme disease in the state of Michigan, because people come in and you do the Lyme test on them that you're told to do, you're trained to do, and it comes back negative. So you just assume that, oh, they don't have this, they must have something else. And so you keep looking for that other thing. In the meantime, you miss the diagnosis because you didn't use the right lab like we talked about earlier. You didn't know how to do the test. You didn't know the disease was based on symptoms, and you didn't know that a trial of antibiotics just might have helped them. And you didn't realize that there's a thing called chronic Lyme disease, which, by the way, there's 2 groups in the United States of doctors that treat Lyme disease. There's the Infectious Disease Society, and there's my group, the International Lyme and Associated Disease Society. And the difference is we believe that there's also, besides acute, chronic Lyme disease. And I can tell you story after story from doctors' families to just lay people whose children have had chronic Lyme, and they've treated them longer and they've gotten better. And so it's being more and more recognized, but insurance companies don't recognize it, and that's a big problem. So right now there's a review board out there, and there's attorney generals being involved with interviewing different doctors from both groups to find out if chronic Lyme really does exist and does long-term antibiotics benefit it. And my problem with that is, like you've heard today, not one of these patients you talked to was just on long-term antibiotics, if at all. They were on detoxification programs and fortification programs. So once again, like Louis Pasteur said, it's not the germ, it's the terrain.
Yeah. Okay. What's that?
I said I just had something on on my mind and then moving away.
So how long exactly have you been treating Lyme?
Along what?
How long have you been treating Lyme? I forget. I'm really foggy today.
I joined the Lyme Society about, less than half a dozen years ago, but I was treating Lyme disease the way I treat it now before I knew that there was that society. Because there's people that I belong to these societies that do detoxification and fortification and healing, which make any disease better when you look at it. And I was treating Lyme people, like Blaine, who you interviewed earlier, before I was even a member of the Lyme Society. So it's the same principle for any illness. I just gave this lecture to Spectrum this past weekend, that if you address the whole body and make the whole body healthy, the body can heal itself. See, I don't make any of these patients better. They make themselves better by listening to what I tell them to do and doing it. And that's what it comes down to. So.
Okay.
That's what I was gonna ask. I was gonna ask if, both the other doctors we interviewed both got into Lyme or toxic, repercussions of illnesses because, a significant other had Lyme, or, it was a main event instead of just kind of easing their way into
Kind of a personal story.
teaching themselves. Everyone like us, someone in our family, had to get it for us to be like, okay, let's start looking into it.
Mm-hmm.
So I was gonna ask you if there was like a, pinnacle moment where it affected you so deeply.
I was already doing it, and I heard about a Lyme meeting, and I went to it, and I was like, oh, these people are doing what I'm doing, so sounds like a nice place to go. In fact, we're going there, I'm going there next month. The Lyme meeting is in San Francisco, and there's going to be a conference on Morgellons disease, which is the biggest unknown out there when it comes to possible infectious disease or men from outer space. So that's really an unusual illness. Not one I did have a lady with Morgellons that said she was cured, and her lesions all went away, and but if you can't do it twice in a row, what does that tell you? Maybe it was just a quirk. Maybe she never really had it, right?
Cool.
Yeah,
What did I just do?
Yeah.
I sent an email to Deborah. She's like the contact person of iLads. She's supposed to get me in contact with Pam because we were interested in going out to the session out in San Francisco. So we're trying to get that set up so we can go and film some of that too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. So a couple quick questions. Would you be okay with taking a look at my sister's charts?
Would I be okay with what?
Would you take a look at my sister's
Records.
history?
Lab work?
If we
Yeah.
send
Yeah,
them
sure.
to you.
Okay.
No
All
problem.
right. Because
Um,
something's not happening that should be
the
happening.
woman, she's been on different types of IVs since April.
You know the big problem that people with Lou Gehrig's have, that I'm discovering, is they have mycoplasma.
Yeah,
And if you
that's
guys aren't
something
familiar
we're
with
looking
Garth
into.
Nicholson,
Yeah.
Garth
Yeah.
Nicholson and mycoplasma incognito. And mycoplasma of the brain is a very difficult thing to get. And the number one way to get it would be hypothermia, because there's no good antibiotics that get through that blood-brain barrier. So anyway,
Yeah.
that's, because I've given Lou Gehrig's patients, you go by, Laurie. I've given Lou Gehrig's patients IV Rocephin, Marum, all that stuff, never to see a change. I did have a Lou Gehrig's patient in a wheelchair, and I don't know if Debbie told you, she got out of the wheelchair and started walking again. Stopped the program because she was feeling so good. Then showed up a month later back in the wheelchair, and we did the same thing we did before, but it didn't work.
In fact, we filmed that. I filmed that.
I don't know if we should have filmed it, but anyway, yeah, everybody saw it.